very, very similar. Remember, a reflex arc in general consists of a receptor, a sensory neuron, perhaps an interneuron, perhaps not, and then a motor neuron, and then an effector. Now the effector in a somatic reflex arc was what? I just mentioned it. The effector. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle. Well, in autonomic reflexes, in autonomic reflex arcs, we have the effectors, and those are going to be the cardiac muscle, smooth muscles, and that would be smooth muscles of associated with glands, smooth muscles associated with the digestive tract, smooth muscles associated with blood vessels, and glands themselves, both endocrine and exocrine. You remember the difference? Endocrine glands secrete put their secretions in the extracellular fluid, where they're then picked up by the blood, and those secretions travel through the whole body. Exocrine secretions are secreted into a duct and travel to a very specific place via that duct. Now here's a very specific reflex arc that's related to blood pressure. Now the receptors for blood pressure, and we'll talk all about this in our next unit, which is relating to blood and cardiovascular system. But the receptors for blood pressure are called baroreceptors. Baro meaning pressure, like a barometer, a barometer, measures atmospheric pressure. The baroreceptors are receptors that are detecting pressure. Now these receptors are located in the carotid arteries and the aorta, and what they do is they're actually stretch receptors. They're monitoring how much those blood vessels are actually being stretched by the blood as it's being forced through it. And so those are constantly sending signals via the vagus nerve. This is the sensory portion. Sending signals via the vagus nerve to the medulla. There's an interneuron of the medulla that's processing that information. And then it's sent via either the vagus nerve or what are called cardiac nerves. And don't worry about knowing these names yet. We'll save that for next unit. To the heart. So we have our receptors here. We have our sensory neuron. Let's do that again. Receptors. Here's our sensory neuron. Here's our interneuron. Here's our motor neuron. Here's another motor neuron. One of the things that we will see when we look at the autonomic nervous system is that there are two motor neurons in that motor pathway. Two neurons in the motor pathway. Whereas in the somatic pathway, there's only one neuron. So, much like somatic reflexes, these autonomic reflexes are things that help to maintain homeostasis and help send signals and control body function so we don't have to think about it. And again, it consists of receptors, effectors, sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons, just like those somatic reflexes did. The difference is where the receptors are and what is carrying out the response. Okay? Now we'll talk specifically about some of these autonomic reflexes when we get into cardiovascular system and a few other places. All right, so let's compare then the motor pathways of these two motor systems. We have